Hello, people. Thank you for coming to this event. I would like to thank to Dr. Campbell to come here. We are very glad we can have him here. I am Martin Barna, online nutrition and fitness, and I will be your host for this podcast. Later on, the recording of this podcast will be released on my Spotify, YouTube, and Facebook platform. You can find all the links on web martinbarna.cz. Many thanks to the Institute of Modern Nutrition, Miloslav and Lukas, for their cooperation and shared enthusiasm for spreading science-based information from the best people in the world, such as Dr. Campbell. Our honorable guest for today is Dr. Bill Campbell. He's an associate professor of exercise science and director of the Performance and Physique Enhancement Laboratory at the University of South Florida. He holds Ph.D. in exercise, nutrition, and preventive health with specialization in sports nutrition from Baylor University. In addition, he is paid consultant to professional sport team organizations, sport entertainment, corporations, and also is a litigation consultant and expert witness related to dietary supplementation. Dr. Campbell has published 3 books on sports and nutrition, including NSCA's Guide to Sports and Exercise Nutrition and Sports Nutrition, Enhancing Athletic Performance. Dr. Campbell has published over 150 peer-reviewed articles, book chapters, and scientific abstracts on sport nutrition, resistance training, and physique enhancement. Dr. Campbell is a pioneering researcher in the area of female physique enhancement and implements his research findings as a consultant coach to female bikini, figure competitors, and male bodybuilders. Follow him on Instagram, Bill Campbell, Ph.D. Hello, Dr. Campbell. Thank you for coming here.
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
Did I miss something about you?
I've got 3 cats. I think other than that, you nailed it all.
And do your cats consume enough protein?
They do. They eat a lot of chicken, some kind of chicken-filled cat food, sometimes tuna. And their snacks have protein in it as well.
That's perfect. I wouldn't expect otherwise. Okay, today's program will include first 40 minutes. Dr. Campbell was so good to make a lecture for us on the following topics: diet breaks for fat loss, high protein intakes to optimize one's physique and the application of rapid fat loss, some strategies for aggressive caloric deficits, and also, which I am very interested in, details about his research review, which will be launched in June or July. When we finish this, we have about 20 minutes for our questions. People, do not hesitate to write or share your questions in the comment section. I will look at it then, and we will maybe use some of those. Dr. Campbell, shall we begin?
Sure, yes.
Perfect, okay. So you can take the word, and I will be gladly to be able to listen.
So the first area that we're talking about is diet breaks. So let me define what diet breaks are. And the reason that this is relevant is we are going to be publishing our latest diet break study that should be published within the next 1 to 2 months. And that was in resistance trained females. So when you think of a word diet break, that's actually part of a larger term or a larger concept called nonlinear dieting. So what is nonlinear dieting? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's dieting, but non-linearly, so that you're not constantly dieting all of the time. You're taking breaks from the diet. So some different categories underneath this umbrella of nonlinear dieting are diet breaks, diet refeeds, alternate day fasting. You could even say time restricted feeding would fall under this umbrella. So what we are going to talk about is the specific category of diet breaks. Now, typically a diet break is followed when dieting, and it usually means at least 1 week or at least 7 days of a break from the diet. So you don't diet for weeks and weeks and weeks or months and months consecutively. You take breaks from dieting. Some of the research also has it as long as 2 weeks. And there's some that for very long diets, they've even had 6-week diet breaks. And I'll just compare that to diet refeeds. A diet refeed is the same concept, but think of that instead of weeks, that's usually in days. So my lab did another study on diet refeeds. We had people take a break from the diet on the weekend, so 2 days per week. But in this case today, we're focusing on diet breaks, which is at least 1 week long. And that's what we did in our study. And what I'll do is I'll just give a little bit of background about diet breaks, and then I'll go into the study that my lab is about to publish. And we actually presented the data on this diet break study last year at the International Society of Sports Nutrition annual conference. So if you're thinking as a coach that you want to use diet breaks, I think you should ask yourself why. Why would you want to use them? And the reason that diet breaks may be valuable only makes sense when you appreciate the negative consequences of dieting. So dieting by itself causes some negative consequences, and I'll just name a few of them. When you're in a caloric deficit, you have a reduction in muscle protein synthesis rates, both at rest and in response to resistance training. So one study, they compared non-dieters to dieters, and what they realized was that when dieting, muscle protein synthesis was reduced by about 20%, and that was with a 20% caloric deficit. And remember, if you're trying, one of our goals in the physique world when you diet, you want to make sure that you maintain your muscle mass. And maybe, I mean, ideally you would even gain muscle mass, although that's not typical. But you want muscle protein synthesis to be as high as you can make it. And we know that dieting suppresses that. The other side of this equation is muscle protein breakdown. You don't want that to be high. You would like that to be as low as possible, but not eliminated, because there is a natural course for muscle protein breakdown just to keep cells healthy. But you don't want it to be elevated beyond normal physiological norms. So another study had subjects diet, again, at a 20% caloric deficit. And this was over a few weeks. And what they reported, and this is a big finding, muscle protein breakdown was elevated or increased by 60%. So not only are you limiting muscle protein synthesis, but you're increasing muscle protein breakdown. Exactly the wrong scenario that you're trying to, that you want if you're trying to build or maintain muscle mass. Another outcome that we've seen with dieting is something referred to as anabolic resistance. What happens here, now this study was in males. Normally your body releases growth hormone, and under normal non-dieting situations, when growth hormone is released from the pituitary gland, some of that will go and convert or cause the production or the synthesis of a very anabolic hormone called IGF-1, or insulin-like growth factor 1. So you want growth hormone to go up, which causes an increase in insulin IGF-1. And then when IGF-1 is elevated and released, it causes growth hormone to go back down. And that's a natural cycle. What we found in dieters is growth hormone increases, as we would expect, but it doesn't cause the synthesis or the release of insulin-like growth factor 1, or IGF-1, which again is very anabolic. And then what happens, because IGF-1 levels are low, growth hormone never gets the feedback signal to be lowered. So growth hormone continues to be elevated. Now, some people think growth hormone's anabolic. Its primary action is actually lipolysis in a dieting situation or causing fat breakdown. So in this scenario, when you're dieting, you are now again experiencing anabolic resistance in addition to decreases in muscle protein synthesis, increases in muscle protein breakdown. And I'll just mention two more negative outcomes. And again, the reason I'm spending time on all of these is you have to appreciate these negative consequences of dieting, because that's what a diet break may be able to help with. That's in theory, that's the thought. So you can imagine if you have low levels of muscle protein synthesis, high levels of muscle protein breakdown, anabolic resistance in males, that is an environment where it's not only difficult to build muscle mass, it's hard to maintain muscle mass. So what we see in a lot of dieting situations is the loss of muscle mass. And now we have two things working against us. We have losing muscle mass, and that has another further negative outcome. That causes your resting metabolic rate or your resting energy expenditure to go down. It also goes down with just weight loss, but it goes down more if the weight you're losing is indeed muscle mass. So we have this entire cascade of events all working to cause a loss of muscle mass and a loss of metabolic rate. And just to make sure we're clear on this, if your metabolism slows down during a diet, over time, it makes it more and more difficult to lose weight, to lose body fat. So you want to do everything you can to keep your metabolism high, keep it as high as you can. And the best way to do that is to not lose muscle mass. Make sure that you're as anabolic as possible. So two other things here. What kind of diets cause all these things? Well, diets that are very long, week after week, month after month of dieting. If it's a long diet phase, you're more likely to experience a loss of muscle mass. And then the other caveat here is the severity of the diet. If you're going on a crash diet, or if you are like significantly lowering your calories, if your caloric deficit is like you're cutting your calories in half, you're inviting the loss of muscle mass. You're inviting the loss of metabolic rate, which makes future fat loss more difficult. And also, if you lose muscle mass and if you suppress your metabolism, you're much more likely to gain body fat in the future when your dieting is over. You're actually priming your body to store more body fat when you start increasing your calories. So we have all of these negative consequences of dieting. And by the way, that's why I like to tell people, don't love the dieting. If you're trying to build muscle, dieting is not your friend. Not that you shouldn't diet. Again, in this world, we work with bodybuilders. It's important that you diet to lose body fat. But some people are just constantly dieting, constantly. We see this a little bit more, at least in my observation. I see this more in females than males. And it's just not conducive to building a healthy metabolism and to building muscle mass. So the thought with diet breaks is if you insert diet breaks periodically, every few months, or as a coach, when your clients start to hit a plateau with fat loss, you introduce a diet break that's 1, maybe 2 weeks long. The theory is you start to push back against all of these negative outcomes. Remember, these were all brought about by a caloric deficit. And what a diet break does is it removes the deficit because you're told to eat more calories. The research tells these subjects, increase your calories for 1 to 2 weeks and bring them back to maintenance calories or what you were eating before you started the diet. So now you're no longer in a caloric deficit. Now, during this period of time, at least in theory, muscle protein synthesis will be higher. Muscle protein breakdown will be lower. Anabolic resistance will go away. Your metabolism hopefully will increase. You'll be able to build more muscle. So the diet break is technically a fix to the negative, broken outcomes that dieting introduces. So there's the background. There's the theory or the philosophy of why we would use diet breaks. So now what I'll do is I'll talk about the famous Matador study, just to give that one its due. And then I'll talk about what our study found, and I'll compare that with another study that was published last year in a very similar population. So I think it was 2018, there was a study published called the Matador Study. This was in obese males. And they found that when obese males would diet for 2 weeks, and then they took a 2-week diet break, and they kept repeating that cycle, the diet breaks really helped these obese males lose more body fat, and it kept their metabolic rates from being significantly lowered. So it was it was a popular study, and the findings really highlighted the potential for diet breaks. Now, since that study has been published, several other studies, including my own, have been done, and we haven't had any, those results have not been replicated in other populations. So I'll tell you what we did in our study. And again, this will be published. I'd like to think in the next 2 months, it will be published in the Journal of Human Kinetics. And the subjects that we had were resistance-trained females. And we had 2 groups. One group dieted for 6 weeks straight. The other group also dieted for 6 weeks. But after every 2 weeks of dieting, they took a 1-week diet break. So 2 weeks dieting, 1 week diet break. 2 weeks dieting, then a second diet break, and then a final 2 weeks of dieting. So both groups dieted for 6 weeks. It just took the one group 8 weeks to get there because they had 2 weeks of increasing their calories. So the instructions that we gave them were, everybody's going to go on a 25% caloric deficit. What we found in my lab is that seems to be a very good deficit where fat loss is realized, and there's very little loss of muscle mass, as long as the subjects are resistance training and eat a high protein diet. So we handled both of those things. All of our subjects resistance trained in my lab, the Performance and Physique Enhancement lab. So every set, every rep was watched by my research team. In terms of protein, they were told to get at least 1.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day, even during the diet break weeks. So at the end of the study, what we found was there were no significant differences between the 2 groups in any body composition or metabolism variable. So both groups lost a significant amount of body fat. I can't recall exactly how much, but it was a significant amount, which you would expect if you're dieting for 6 weeks. But the diet break group they didn't lose more body fat. The diet break group also did not maintain their muscle mass any better. Both groups maintained their muscle mass equally. And then the other physiological outcome was resting energy expenditure. That didn't change at all in either group, which, since they didn't lose muscle mass, that kind of makes sense, that their metabolic rates were not lowered or not decreased during our study. So here now we have a resistance trained population, and I'm going to compare what we found to a study that was published last year. I think, well, maybe even 2020. Martin, have you heard of the ice cap trial? This was with Jackson Payos. It was a group from Australia. Is that something that you're familiar with? Or no?
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, so I'll just briefly say what they found was the same thing that we found. They had resistance trained subjects, males and females. Everybody lost fat. They equally lost as much muscle mass. And essentially the diet break strategy did not offer any advantage to the subjects that were in the diet break groups, or that were in the diet break group. The one thing that they did find in that study, and then I'm going to add on to what we found in our study. And this is very important, because right now I'm telling you, there's no difference. Diet breaks are useless if you're resistance training, but I'll also give some further context on that as well. In the study that was published from the Australian research group, they found that the group that was in the diet breaks, so the ones taking diet breaks, and by the way, they did 3 weeks, I think it was 3 weeks of dieting, then a 1 week break, and then 3 weeks of dieting and a 1 week break. And I think they did that for 12 weeks. What they found was that the groups that did not take breaks, their desire to eat was significantly higher. So they had a much higher level, a much higher desire to increase food. And they also did another psychological measure of hunger. And they found a significant increase in hunger over the course of the study in the group that never took the diet breaks. So in that study in resistance trained people, we find that diet breaks, at least in the short term, they didn't offer body composition improvements, but they did help with hunger-related feelings on 2 different measures. Now we go to my study, the study that we did at the University of South Florida, and we found something very similar. We gave our subjects a questionnaire called the 3-factor eating inventory, and that looks at 3 things: hunger, disinhibition, and restraint. We found a significant difference in one of these psychological measures, and what it was the measure of disinhibition. Now, that's a big word. Disinhibition is the tendency to overeat. So you want disinhibition to be low when you're dieting, because you don't want to have the tendency to overeat. So the lower, the better. So in our study, disinhibition was significantly different. The groups that had the diet breaks, it actually was lowered over the 6 weeks of dieting, or over their 8-week study. In the other group, when there were no diet breaks, it went the other direction. It increased. So that's 2 studies, both in resistance trained populations, where the diet breaks helped with the psychology of eating, or lowering hunger, or lowering your propensity to overeat, lowering your desire to eat. Now, why would that be? Well, it's probably, now again, I don't think anybody will know, because this is difficult to measure why it happened. But I think the reason it happened was the people were able to take a break and potentially feel full during their diet breaks. Now, remember, during a diet break, they only go back to caloric maintenance levels. You don't overeat. You don't eat in a surplus during this time. So that's 2 studies showing the same thing. And something that I think is interesting is, if the diets were extended for more than 6 weeks or more than 12 weeks, over time, if you're not as hungry and your desire to eat is less, you would have a greater likelihood of adhering to your diet. So we have that context. Now, I also just want to end with 2 other thoughts on diet breaks. Our study, remember how I started our conversation, Martin? I said, you have all of these negatives about dieting. Well, our study didn't cause any of those negative outcomes. Did the subjects lose muscle mass? No. Did their metabolisms get lowered? No, they stayed the same. So in that case, if your diet is not causing negative consequences, there is no utility for a diet break to help. It's like you're trying to fix something with a diet break that isn't broke, your metabolism or losing muscle mass. So diet breaks, other than helping with feelings of hunger and not feeling like you want to overeat as much, other than that, If the diet's not causing a lot of harm or negative consequences, the diet breaks probably aren't going to be helpful. But now let's talk about another population: bodybuilders, bikini competitors, physique competitors. Those people, they diet for long periods of time because they get really lean when they step on stage. And they diet fairly severely. Their caloric deficits can get quite severe. So if you look at bodybuilders, and again, we don't have data in bodybuilders. My people were resistance trained, but they weren't bodybuilders stepping on stage. The Australian study was in athletes that were sport athletes that also resistance trained. So I think a diet break has more potential to help prevent negative dieting consequences in people who are more extreme with their dieting practices, like bodybuilders. So again, a diet break potentially can fix things, but it's not going to fix anything if it's not broken. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, of course.
Did you have any follow-up questions just on diet breaks? Because that's all I wanted to discuss about diet breaks.
Just a second. No, not exactly on diet breaks, but I would like to mention that last year when we talked, the other podcast, we discussed that diet breaks do not have that use we thought from the Matador study, and also we discussed that the psychological aspect is very important, because I use it sometimes only if client is educated about all of this, and he says, look, Martin, I need diet break because it will help me to adhere for this journey for longer. And if I can say that if it is right, if it is true that they will be able to adhere longer for, let's say, the final body weight from the diet, I think this is very positive. Maybe bodybuilders don't use this, but general population needs to lose weight and keep it down. That's all I can say about this.
Yeah, and you make a good point. Since you're a high-level coach, there's another big difference between what coaches do and what researchers do. So in all of the research studies, we would tell our subjects, or we did in the other researchers, they say you're going to diet for 3 weeks and then you're going to take a 1-week diet break, or you're going to diet for 4 weeks, or in our case, 2 weeks, then take a diet break. Coaches don't do that. At least they shouldn't. Coaches use diet breaks when they're needed. So here's an example. If you tell a client, you're going to diet for 4 weeks and then you're going to take a diet break. Well, what if that client over the 4 weeks is losing body fat? Their workouts are good. They're feeling fine. They're not struggling with the diet. I would not want to stop that momentum. So a better approach in coaching is to identify when there's a plateau in fat loss, and now there's a time to introduce a diet break. So maybe that's 2 weeks, maybe that's 8 weeks, maybe that's 6 weeks. It would change from client to client.
And so also, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting. No,
that was it. Just they are practiced in the real world a little bit differently than how we do it in the research world.
Exactly. And also in real world with normal person, let's say, general population, they do their own diet breaks, if you know what I mean. Sometimes they overeat, and on the average of the week, they do not lose weight. So I can see that there are some diet breaks, on the data about the client, because I see everything about them. Average of calories per week, intake of any macronutrient, the exact foods they eat in the app, and also how many steps they do, how much they work out, minutes in gym, on the bike, let's say, and of course the distance they travel on the bike for the time, etc. So we work with all these things, and also with how much tired they feel, how much hungry, and how much strong they feel. And based on this, we adjust it. But as you said, most times I do not set the diet break. They use it, let's say vacation, or the weekend with girlfriend, etc.
Yes. So yeah, and it is interesting. Both of the studies, I'm aware of only 2 that have been done in resistance trained individuals. and they both confirmed the results that each other shared. A psychological improvement related to hunger and disinhibition. So I'll just talk for a few minutes now about protein, because what we do in all of our research studies, and let me just make a statement. When you're dieting, protein needs to be prioritized. And the reason it needs to be prioritized is 3 reasons. One, it's an anabolic nutrient. Everything about dieting is catabolic. It's breaking down. Protein is the one nutrient that can help prevent the breakdown of muscle. Carbs can too, to some extent as well. But protein, if you can keep it relatively high when dieting, it helps prevent the loss of muscle mass. The other thing that it does is, if you can prevent the loss of muscle mass, you also prevent a decrease in your metabolic rate during your diet. So those two are like hand in hand. They work together. And then the third thing is protein has the highest thermic effect of food, meaning that it will actually cause your body to burn additional calories from protein when it's compared to the same amount of calories that you would ingest from carbs or fat. So it's actually an exergonic nutrient. It causes your body to burn or release more calories. And obviously during a fat loss phase, you want to burn more calories. So protein helps preserve muscle mass. It helps to preserve metabolic rate, and it actually causes the body to expend more calories due to the diet-induced thermogenesis that protein has. So when people are dieting, especially if they're resistance training, how much protein should they eat? And I like to give a minimal amount. So my suggestion is try not to ever go below 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And that's about 0.75 grams per pound if you're in the United States. But 1.6 grams per kg of body weight, according to the literature, when you keep it there, you prevent the loss of muscle mass from dieting. And these are in athletic and resistance training populations. Now, that's the minimum. I like to set a goal of 2.2 grams per kg when dieting. And the reason I like even going that high is I'm not convinced that it's going to cause you to build more muscle or even maintain more muscle. But what it does do is it is the most satiating nutrient. So it makes you feel fuller than carbs or fat. And feeling full is very important when dieting. Ultimately, that's what makes people fail on a diet. They lose the battle to hunger. So protein helps control hunger. So it helps maintain muscle mass. It burns more calories, and it also helps you feel more satiated throughout the day. And there is some data to suggest that excess protein in resistance training people, it does not get converted to body fat. And that's just based on a few studies, but it is something to note. It's hard to gain fat from protein, much easier from excess carbs or excess dietary fat. So there's my just my brief thoughts on protein intakes, and I would also suggest there's look at this 2 ways. How should you get your 1.6 grams per kg? I would suggest dividing that up about 3 to 5 protein feedings per day. Ideally, they're spread evenly throughout the day. However, even if you truncate that and you squeeze it in like a time-restricted feeding plan, that may be more beneficial for fat loss in some people, but you do sacrifice your body's ability to maintain as much muscle mass. So you kind of have to weigh your options. Are you more focused on fat loss, or are you focused on some fat loss and a desire to maintain muscle mass? You always want to maintain muscle mass, but sometimes you may sacrifice a little bit to lose more body fat. So that's where the protein feeding schedule can fit in to how you're planning your day with your protein intake. Did you have any comments or feedback on that?
Well, I would like to say that I think sometimes client, not every client is a bodybuilder, and they say something like, I like fasting, let's say, I use it, and it is a good habit for me because of, let's say, how my day goes, how my work goes, etc.
Yes.
So I educate him on the topic you said. I basically say the same thing to my clients now. And if he chooses, then we will build the habit for time-restricted eating, because if it will be more sustainable for him and he will be able to bring up habits which he will use a year from now, 2 years from now, I see it as a win, even if he sacrificed some muscle in his case. Because if I will force him to eat, let's say, 5 meals a day, I would say 3 to 4 is good, or I recommend 3 to 4, same feeding of protein. But if I would force him to do 5 and he just don't have time to eat that much, then why? He can do it for a short period of time, but we do not build maintainable habits, so he will fail on the long run. That is what I wanted to say about this.
Yeah, and I like what you said. Adherence is the most important variable. Adherence is more important than the ideal plan. Because if you can't follow the ideal plan, but you can follow something that's just a little bit less than perfect, that's going to give you better long-term outcomes. So adherence trumps perfection.
Perfect. Exactly. I agree. I have some question there, but it is not about protein, if you asked about this.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, depending on what the question is, I'll be glad to share.
I mean, we will do it later in the end. You can continue. That's what I meant.
Oh, okay. I think I'm done with protein. I know you said it about 2:40 with about the last 20 minutes. We wanted to go to questions. I will mention one thing about time restricted eating. I used to think that was not the best. Like, you're not getting any advantage. But I recently read a study on time-restricted feeding. And in fact, I reviewed this in my new research review, where they compared time-restricted feeding to flexible dieting. Now, I do flexible dieting. That's kind of the diet that I follow most of the time. And one of the things, this study really changed my mind about time-restricted feeding. It's kind of what we already said. The nice thing about time-restricted feeding is, at least in this study, they told the subjects, you don't have to diet. Don't worry about reducing your calories. Just don't eat before noon and don't eat after 8 p.m. That's the only restrictions they put. And guess what happened? They dieted. When they basically skipped breakfast, they didn't make those calories up throughout the day during that 8-hour feeding window. So for some people, time-restricted feeding may seem less intrusive than a caloric deficit. And again, according to the research, you're going to get a caloric deficit anyway. So I really do like time-restricted feeding for some people who can easily adhere to a time-restricted feeding schedule, and it may help them adhere better for longer periods of time. The only drawback is you're not getting the protein feeding in the morning. So we are sacrificing maybe a little bit of retention of muscle mass during a diet phase. But again, if somebody's able to adhere better to a time-restricted feeding plan, better than any other option, I see no reason why a time-restricted feeding plan is not the ideal diet strategy for that particular person.
And also, let's say we can adjust it. So we can say the same thing you said about the day for the client, but we can say also, but in the morning, you will have only protein drink or 2 scoops, let's say. I know it is not time-restricted eating then, but it doesn't matter for the client. It's just about the system which works. And I think it works on the premise that he cannot eat anything. Now he can eat only the protein in the morning. It could delete some setbacks, right?
Yes, yeah. That's kind of like a protein modified time restricted feeding
Something
plan.
like that.
That makes a lot of sense. And now, yes, I guess by definition, it's not time restricted feeding anymore, but you are addressing the lack of protein earlier in the day. So that's a great hybrid. I would call that a hybrid time restricted feeding plan.
Yeah. Dr. Campbell, I would like to hear about that research review of yours. We cannot forget about that.
Yes. So I'll be launching a research review. It's going to be called Body by Science, and I'll be launching that in the next few weeks. So I can't send you to my website now, just simply because my website is not launched yet, but I'm very close. But if anybody's interested in getting the first issue, the inaugural issue for free, you would just simply go email me. My email is very simple to remember. It's Bill Campbell at billcampbellphd.com. And if you go there and email me, what I'll do is as soon as my website is launched, I'll send you a link where you can go download the inaugural first issue for free. And if you like the research review, then hopefully you would subscribe. And just a little bit about it, what I'm doing in my research review is I'm summarizing 2 studies per month that are very focused on fat loss and muscle gain. So it's hyper focused on only those 2 things. So like the example here, one of my issues is summarizing or reviewing a study where they compared time restricted feeding to flexible dieting. So I review the entire study, I summarize it, I give you my thoughts. The other thing that I'm doing in my research review is I'm bringing in experts, people like you, Martin, expert coaches or medical doctors, researchers, registered dietitians. And I'm asking them, okay, I just reviewed this study on how to build muscle or about fat loss. How would you apply this to your clients? Or how would you apply this in your life? Because you can review a scientific study, but it's really good to get expert opinion on how to apply it, because you don't always do the same thing that's in the research study. So I think that's probably the best value of my Body by Science research review. You're getting my summaries, but you're getting expert opinions on applying the research to either yourself, if you're serious about your exercise and nutrition programs, or if you're a coach working with athletes who are trying to maximize muscle, or again, trying to go on to a fat loss phase. So real quick, just some of the studies that I'm reviewing in the first few issues are protein timing. We talked about that.
I can see that now.
Throughout the day. We talked about in the inaugural issue that's going to be free for everybody. We also did processed foods. Can you eat processed foods and not gain body fat? So we talked about that. There's another one about training volume. How much should you increase your training volume, resistance training volume over time? We have a ketogenic dieting study in bodybuilders that I'm reviewing. And we also have one on time-restricted feeding, which I already talked about, where that kind of changed my mind a little bit. And another topic early on is detraining. What if you take a few weeks off from the gym? How much muscle mass do you lose? Do you lose any? Do you lose a lot? What happens if you take time off? So hopefully you can appreciate all of these studies are very specific to people who are coaching people and helping them with those strategies that they can incorporate into their clients' training programs and nutrition strategies.
It looks wonderful. I'm just looking at it. It's the one you sent me on the
yes.
email.
And you may be the first person to get that. I'm trying to think
really?
that I sent it to anybody
else.
No. I think
I don't honored.
Thank you. I may have sent it to one other person, but yeah, you're the first or second to get it from me.
That's the best gift you could give me. Thank you very much, Dr. Campbell.
Yeah, if you have time, give me your feedback later on. I'd like to.
I will give you the feedback. I want to say that great thing about this is first the topics. They are great, the topics from the practical standpoint, and also I love it because it is not just theory, but you use the application. And that's very important for coaches because many times I read some scientific article and then I'm thinking something like, okay, but what does it mean for my client? What it changes for my client? And here I can see that also. So that's great. That's great. I think I really recommend it to people even now, but I didn't read it yet, you know, the whole thing. But I'm looking forward to it today, tomorrow, maybe.
Yeah. And let me just say again, if you want me to send you the free issue, as soon as my website launches, just email me, Bill Campbell at billcampbellphd.com.
We'll give it in the description of the podcast and YouTube video, etc. Of course, that's perfect. When will be the, let's say, next episode?
Yeah, so I think I'm just doing some final touches on my website. So I'm working with a website developer. So this is a little bit out of my control.
Yeah.
But I think today's what, June 22nd?
Yeah.
2 weeks, it should be up and down. You should download the free issue. I might even have the free issue available by the end of this week. That's very close.
That's great. And when will be the next episode? You know, how often you will send
it? I'm going to release each new issue the middle of each month. So the next issue will either be July 15th-ish or August 15th. It just depends on the final date of my website being launched. So either July or August 15th. I'll say August 15th just to be safe, but it could be sooner than that.
That's great. I'm really looking forward to this. And I think it is a good choice for you to do something like this. And don't forget to mention it on your Instagram, of course, you know, in the description.
Yeah, I will.
Because this will be very, very good thing for people. Is there anything we missed about the research we should tell to people?
No, I don't think so. I think I'd want to highlight again the study that I reviewed about time-restricted feeding. It changed my thinking on time-restricted feeding. I'm much more open to it now, and kind of how you as an elite coach, how you would change it a little bit. I think that's exactly what I would recommend doing. Time-restricted feeding for the people who benefit from it, but also give them a protein feeding earlier in the day so that they're getting these multiple hits on muscle protein synthesis throughout the day.
Exactly. Okay, can we have a few questions now?
Yes, yeah, I'd love to answer any questions.
Okay, so first question I see on the live, I will start with people who send us questions now. The caloric maintenance level, how many calories should be there? Should I calculate new diet plan every break and every next dieting all the time?
So you can. I think that gets hard because you're talking about very small margins of calories. So I'll just say, if your normal caloric maintenance calories is 2,000, and then you're going on a 25% caloric restriction. So now you're going to go down to 1,500 calories, let's say for 4 weeks. Then you take a diet break. So you go back to 2,000 for 2 weeks. Then you're going to go back to 1,500 again. In theory, if the diet break works the way your maintenance calories shouldn't change. So you don't really have to keep readjusting and readjusting. Now, if you're losing a lot of body fat or you are losing some muscle mass, then you may want to have a period of readjustment. But I don't think you have to do that. By the way, in our study, what we're going to be publishing, the average weight gain was about 0.25 kilograms during 1 week of diet breaks. So it's a very small amount. And some people actually lost weight. Some people did gain a little bit, but on average, it was about 0.25 and maybe even up to like 0.4 of weight gain. But remember, at the end of the study, there were no differences in body weight loss. So in the long term, it's not causing any extra weight gain, but you could expect just a little bit of an increase during a diet break, and that shouldn't scare you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, if I can, I will have one question of mine.
Yes.
Look, let's say there's a peak week, bodybuilding competition is coming. Would you and how would you adjust sodium intake, water intake, or would you just get the person ripped enough and then try to use homeostasis and not screw things? Yeah, I think you know what I mean.
Yes. So my coaching experience with bodybuilders was less than 10 people where I've coached them to stage. And I've always worked with either first time or second time competitors. So I'll just tell you what my strategy was with them. Get them as lean as possible, and I'll come back to that. But I just wanted them to track, just be aware of sodium intake. I didn't manipulate sodium at all. If it's your first or second show, you're going to manipulate it. You have no context. Should it go up? Should I eliminate it? So just know what you're doing. And then when you go, let's say you're going to do another show, now you can start experimenting with it. So I'm treating this like a scientific experiment. In terms of water, I usually just, again, increase water intake throughout the week, going into prep, but not to extreme levels, and just enough for them to take records so that in the future, and what I've always told them, look, there are better coaches than me that are more experienced that are better coaches than me for more experienced bodybuilders. Mm-hmm. So you can go to them working with me with, here's what I did before, and it was very minimal. But I think, and you suggested this, there's a lot of people who aren't as lean as they should be, and then they think that manipulating sodium and water is going to somehow give them the appearance of a much lower body fat. That's crazy. If you're not lean, you're not going to magically make your body look different. And the people who do have drastic differences from water and sodium manipulation, in my experience, they're the leanest people. So if you're not lean, you're not going to get any advantage from this, in my opinion. You've got to focus on low body fat levels. And I would just say monitor water and sodium if it's your first show. And then moving into the future, if you want to experiment, then you have a baseline to compare it to.
Mm-hmm. And another crazy thing about this is, as you said, you just, you can see the data about how much sodium you are taking in, how much water you are taking in. And I see many coaches saying something like, you will do this and this without looking on any data about the client. This much sodium, this much water. It is not the same. There's some kind of homeostasis, right? Where body is adjusted to, and I cannot have the same sodium intake as you and have the same reaction of the body, let's say. Is it right?
That is exactly right. Make yourself a scientific experiment, get data, and then next time go ahead and manipulate something. And again, whatever you want to do, and then you're taking pictures, then you're comparing either this did or did not work for me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think the data is a very important thing. I have all the data, several months or several weeks of data from, let's say, 500 people now. And I can see how much it pushed me forward. I can solve things for the clients very easily now. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, so there is a comment from one lady. She said, I have increased my proteins just to 1.8 grams per kilo, and it saved my hair loss as an unexpected side effect. It stopped her hair loss, which is a good thing for her. So she just wanted to share it.
Yeah, that's great. That's
the protein is good for the skin and the hair for girls. That's I think missed point for many people.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and again, if you're starving, your body starts to catabolize protein. So if you're feeding higher levels of protein, your body doesn't perceive a starved state.
Makes sense. Dr. Campbell, can we have a few more questions or is it enough?
No, okay. I've got a few more minutes.
Thank you very much. Look, I have another question. I will try to explain it in some simple terms, so people will understand. I know you will. Let's say supersets or normal training, one exercise with a resting period as normal. Which is better if we would say that it is the same person, he's same trained, he wants to get most muscle. Should I do, let's say, if it is me, should I do in 60 minutes workout supersets and get there more volume, but the intensity will be lower because I don't have resting periods enough, as I see it? Or should I train normal way, one exercise or one set, then long enough period of rest, etc., etc. Is there some data which would help me to choose which one is better for muscle building?
I don't think there's direct data on supersets being superior than traditional sets. So let me just confirm. A superset is doing like chest then back, or biceps then triceps. Is that how we're defining superset?
Yes, we could.
So I will say this. I like the idea of supersets because of efficiency. I think it allows you to get more done in a period of time. So I'll give an example. If you do, let's just say chest and back, so bench press and lat pull down as our examples. You could do bench press and do 4 sets and take 3 minutes between each set. So set 1 bench press, 3-minute rest, set 2 bench press, 3-minute rest, and then on. Then move to the lat pull down and do the same thing. Set, 3-minute rest, second set, 3-minute rest. What I like is kind of like a hybrid approach to supersets and traditional rest period sets. So you do chest, lat pull down, chest, lat pull down, but you rest for, let's say, you can still rest for 4 minutes in between, but because you're doing lat pull down, your chest is still able to recover during that rest period. Or even if you increased it to 5 minutes. If you do 5 minutes from chest to chest and you're always getting a lat pull down in there, you're getting more work done, but because you're working the opposite muscle group, you are getting adequate recovery. So under that model, you're not really sacrificing intensity. You're not sacrificing that. Now, if you did bench press and then you immediately went to lat pull down and then took 2 minutes and then went back to chest, I think now you are sacrificing your intensity. And I do not think that's as good for long-term muscle gain. I think if that's your approach, you're better off doing the traditional sets with a few minutes of a rest period between. But if you can do supersets, but still give yourself enough rest period per muscle group, I think that's an ideal way to get more volume. Or in my case, I just do it because I want to get out of the gym faster. I don't like being there more than about an hour. So it allows me to get more done.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I see one more benefit there, and it is from experience only, not from studies, of course. If I do supersets with a client, or I do it because I like it, I see that my cardiovascular endurance grows faster. And if I can lift more for longer and have lower rests and keep the intensity same or higher, then it means in the end, on the long run, it could be another benefit, right?
I think, yes. I think potentially, yes. And again, recognizing no research data on that, but
of course. I'm just thinking,
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Perfect. Is the paradigm that intensity and training volume dominate along with progressive overload in regard of muscle building still in 2022, or is there some change?
No, I think if I were to prioritize what's the most important variable, I would say intensity. And by intensity, I mean that you would take each set to near failure. You do not have to go to absolute failure where you can't lift the weight anymore, but you do need to go close to that, probably within 2 to 3 repetitions of failure. So that's the most important thing.
2 to 3 reps in reserve.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there is, I can cite a few studies to support that statement. And secondary to that, volume would be the second most important thing. Now, that's where I start to have more questions. But at this point, I do think that increasing volume over time does contribute to greater increases in muscle hypertrophy. But you do have to be careful, because if you increase your volume by 10% every month, by the end of the year, you can't possibly keep up with it. So volume needs to be very, very slowly added. And I'll say this, the way that I increase volume in training blocks, I might add a set to a muscle group every 2 weeks. So I'm doing 4 sets for my shoulders for these 2 weeks. And then over the next 2 weeks, I might make it 5. And then I'll stay there for a few weeks. Then I'll go to 6, because your volume can get out of hand very quickly.
I love the way how you explain this, because I see too many people, mostly females, they do 10 reps with some weight, but you know, they do not even have any intensity. You would give them twice as heavy dumbbells. They still continue and talk. You know what I mean? It's not just about how many reps with how many kilos you will lift, but how close to failure or how intense it was for you personally, not for your friend, etc. And that, yes, I agree with what you said, of course.
Yeah, and what I like, you could blindfold somebody. They don't even know what weight they're lifting, and as long as they go to near failure, they get the same hypertrophic stimulus. So the weight really doesn't matter. Well, it does with it. If you're starting to be able to do more than 30 repetitions, now you still gain muscle. You're just not optimizing muscle gain.
It's so about 40% of 100 max, the 30?
No, well, you could say 30%. I'm saying 30 repetitions. If the weight that you choose, I think in the study that I'm referring to, it was a 20% 1RM.
Yeah, 20.
They were getting like 70.
I was asking how many percent it was from one rep max, you know.
Yeah. I don't remember if it was 40%. I don't know. But if you're able to do more than 30 repetitions, now we can say, based on one study that I'm familiar with, you are not optimizing muscle gains. You can still gain muscle, but it won't be as much as what you would get with a weight that allows you to get less than 20 or 30 repetitions.
I think that this, in practical terms, is not really a problem, because most of my clients, when they hit, let's say, 20 reps, they start getting bored. So they never achieve the failure or close to it, because the focus is not there anymore. Maybe bodybuilders, of course, but you know, general population. Which are the secondary priorities at least you should look at? Any other priorities you would set to your client?
See, so intensity, volume, frequency. How often should you stimulate a muscle group? The only data that I can suggest is more than once per week. So if you're only hitting a muscle group once per week, that is inferior. 2 times per week seems to be the good, but 3 is just as good as 2. 4 is just as good as 2. The only thing that I can confidently say, based on a small amount of research, hit each muscle group more than once per week. So 2, 3, 4, somewhere in there. And again, that's assuming that volume is the same.
Perfect. Seems I'm doing things correctly for now. Can I have last question?
Yes, let's do one last question.
Okay. Are there any interesting insights from your current scientific work? Any new studies in progress? Anything you could tell us about it? You know, I'm just interested.
Yeah, so my lab just finished a protein tracking study in non-resistance trained females. So we gave females who just started resistance training a high protein diet, or we told them eat a low protein diet, or basically don't change it. And then in addition to that, we said we had 2 groups that were higher protein. One, we gave them a flexible dieting approach where we said, you have to get 2.2 grams per kg. Make sure you get this. The other group, we said, just intuitively try to increase your protein. Just try to double what you're currently doing now. And so what we're really doing is we're comparing macro tracking versus intuitive eating focused on protein. And then if they did that, what were the outcomes? Does it result in increased muscle mass? So that study we just finished, we're working on the manuscript now, or we will start working on the manuscript soon.
Can you tell us the results or not? Probably not, right?
I can't say the results yet because we didn't publish all of the data. I can tell you this because we did present this data. The group that had the goal that was tracking, they increased their protein from 1.1 grams per kg to 2. And then the intuitive group, the group that we said, hey, don't track anything, just try to increase protein, they went from about 1.1 to 1.4 grams per kg. So if you're trying to eat a pretty high protein diet, our data suggests you need to set a goal and you need to track it. Just trying to just do it intuitively doesn't get you to the levels, does not get you to higher levels of protein.
Yeah, of course, you need to build the habit. It's like with waiting food. You don't have to wait your food every day for the rest of your life. But if you do it for a few weeks, you will be better, without waiting.
Yes.
Is there anything I've missed you would like to share with our audience?
No, I'll just say my email again. If anybody would like to email me so that I can put you on my my waiting list for the free inaugural issue, email me at Bill Campbell at billcampbellphd.com. And as soon as my website's launched, I'll send you the link to download the issue that you have.
Perfect. Thank you very much. People, don't forget to follow Dr. Campbell on Instagram. Bill Campbell, PhD is his Instagram. You really want to see the content, really. Okay. Thank you for your time, Dr. Campbell. We are honored to be able to learn from such a legend as you are in your field. I will hope that one day we will meet again like this. And farewell and thanks to Dr. Campbell and Institute of Modern Nutrition, as well as the audience.
Thank you.
Good evening, at least here.